Hi, friends, and welcome back to AfterMass. If you are new here, this is the podcast for people who want more than just faith on Sundays. I'm Anna, and today's episode is a little different only because I will be speaking on kind of current events. But I just can't really keep posting episodes without addressing what's going on in the world, because when tragedy strikes and when the headlines feel like a punch to the gut, we have to ask ourselves, how do we as Catholics respond? So this week alone, we've seen the horrifying acts of violence against Iryna, murdered on the subway, the assassination of Charlie Kirk, the shooting in Denver at the Denver High School, and the previous week, the shooting at the Annunciation Catholic School while the children were in mass. And so these aren't just stories on a screen. These are real people, real families, real lives that will never be the same. And I'm sure a lot of you feel the same way that I do, which is I'm tired, overwhelmed, and I feel a little numb. But we cannot let numbness or despair have the last word. I don't know about you guys, but it's like every day there's a new headline and the tragedies just get worse and worse. And at some point, I think to myself, my soul is not made to watch all of this stuff. I have my phone in my hand and I'm scrolling and I see 5 angles of Charlie Kirk being assassinated, no filter. And there used to be a time where if anything graphic or potentially offensive or traumatizing was posted online, you would have to actually click like, yes, I want to see this. And now these videos just autoplay. So you're not even looking for this information. You're not even looking to see what's going on, especially, at Charlie Kirk's his assassination. I wasn't looking for that video. I was just looking for information, and this video pops up and just auto plays, one angle just straight across from him, another angle from the side where the whole situation, I'm sure we've all seen the videos, but you think it doesn't really have an effect on you, even though you feel maybe outraged or sad or whatever. But then the next video is, a cute baby doing something, or, some random breaking news about some other disaster, or then it's like, oh, practice canceled, and oh, my husband's calling, and the doctor, and then my friend's engaged, and it's like, it's such whiplash. So it almost subconsciously, you're like, I feel like I'm in a movie. That's how I felt. Like, I feel like that was a movie, a special effect. There's no way that I just saw that with my own eyes and then saw a video of a puppy, So it leaves me, at least me personally, it leaves me feeling numb. It's the weirdest time that we live in. But again, that numbness or despair, we cannot let it have the last word. And the first thing we need to do as Catholics is we have to name the darkness. We don't sugarcoat it. We don't dismiss it. We acknowledge the weight of what has happened. Our world is broken. Violence, death, it's all very real. And pretending it doesn't affect us or shrugging it off like it's just another headline is very dangerous for our souls. Scripture reminds us that the Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. And I believe that's Psalm 34. And it's a promise. God is not absent in tragedy. He's right there in the middle of it, grieving with us, even if we temporarily forget. God sees us. He sees you, and he hasn't abandoned us. And it's easy to think that he has, because, once we've named the darkness, we're left with the hardest question, which is why? Like, why do these things keep happening if God is right here? Why do people commit such evil? And the world will give us a dozen answers. Some people will point right away to politics. Others will point to mental health and poverty or broken systems. And yeah, all of those things do play a role, of course. But as Catholics, we have to dig deeper. When these things happen, sometimes I probably have said this phrase 10 times in the last month, but I will turn to my husband and I'll say, how is that person made in the image and likeness of God? How is that possible? But they are. Every single human being, no matter what they do, is created in God's image. That dignity can never be erased. But, and this is where it gets difficult, but we also believe in free will. So God created us with the ability to choose. And because of that freedom, humans are capable of amazing, great good, but also devastating evil. God doesn't force anyone to love him or to do good or to protect life. He allows freedom, and freedom misused leads to destruction. And at the root of every evil act, every act of violence is the fruit of sin. Original sin wounded human nature. It bent us towards selfishness and pride and anger and hatred. And every time someone chooses sin, it doesn't only affect them. It ripples out into the whole world. The Catechism says this in, I believe it's paragraph 409. I wanted to try and memorize it, but that's not going to happen. It says, this dramatic situation of the whole world, which is in the power of the evil one, makes man's life a battle. So that's our reality. Life on earth is not neutral ground. It's a battleground. So when we ask why, the Catholic answer isn't simple, but it's sin. It's misuse of free will. It's the devil's influence stirring up violence and division and death. And until Christ returns, this is the struggle that we are going to live in. But sin doesn't get the last word, and evil doesn't get the final say. Christ's victory on the cross means that even in the ugliest moments of history, God's grace is stronger. And that's the anchor that we hold on to. But holding on to that hope doesn't mean that we ignore the reality in front of us. Because even as we proclaim Christ's victory, we still have to wrestle with how that victory plays out in a broken world. And sometimes what makes the weight of sin and evil feel even heavier is not just the act of violence itself, but the way that we see people respond to it. I know we've all seen it, the comment sections after tragedies, the way that people will post memes and snark and even cheer, like literally applauding, dancing when someone dies. And at first when I saw these things, it was obviously shocking, but then I've almost come to expect it. And that's the piece that should break our hearts. Why does this happen? Why do people celebrate evil? On a psychological level, it's tied to tribalism. Social media has made every single thing a battle of us versus them. So if the victim wasn't a part of my group, then they must be the enemy. And when the enemy falls, some people feel like they've won. It gives this false sense of justice or victory, but it's all counterfeit, because the second that we celebrate death, we have dehumanized another child of God. And then it's also about projection. When people are hurting, angry, or powerless in their own lives, celebrating someone else's downfall, it becomes a way to release that frustration. It's a dark mirror of what love is meant to be. Instead of sacrificing for others, they feed on the destruction of others. And I'm not here to pin people against. It wasn't the Christians celebrating what happened to Charlie Kirk. I'm not here to say that, because there have been a lot of people across both sides, both aisles, both political, sides that I have seen have really awful reactions to not only what happened to Charlie Kirk, but the subway situation with Iryna and the shooting at the Catholic Church. The reactions are getting worse and worse with every tragedy. And at the core of that is that sacrificial love has been lost. Real love, not like the Hallmark, I love you, you love me, surface level thoughts and prayers type of love. Not the sentimental feeling of love, but the gritty, self-emptying love that Jesus showed on the cross. That kind of love is almost foreign to our culture now. We have replaced it with conditional love. We've replaced it with performative outrage. We've replaced it with revenge disguised as justice. And that's why we see people cheering in the comments, because they have trained themselves to think that love is just about how someone makes them feel. If you don't make me feel good, if you don't agree with me, if you don't stand for what I stand for, then you don't deserve love. And then they take it a step further. You don't even deserve life. That's the exact opposite of the gospel. And that leads me into the whataboutisms. Those have really gotten me fired up this week. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, it's when you bring up a tragedy of a school shooting, let's say, and someone says, well, what about this other issue? Or you mourn a life lost and people say, well, what about all these other lives lost? You didn't post about them. You didn't speak up about them. That mentality is poison, garbage, straight trash, because it distracts us from grieving what's right in front of us, and it turns compassion into a competition. The whataboutisms going on is really just another form of hardness of heart. It's a refusal to look at suffering as suffering. It's a way to dodge responsibility and avoid compassion to make sure that you never have to sit in someone else's pain. Like, it's so unbelievably selfish. And that's why we're in this cultural mess to begin with. Because when you strip away compassion, when you strip away sacrificial love, you are left with a vacuum. And that vacuum gets filled with cynicism and sarcasm and celebration of evil. But the church gives us another way. Christ calls us to see the image of God in every single person, not just in the people we like, not just in the people who think like us, but every single person. And the real test of that, it's not loving the people who already love us back. Jesus said it himself. If you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners love those who love them. That's the true sign of a Christian, loving your enemies. It's easy to love Peter, James, and John. It's easy to love the people who support us and make us feel safe and seen. It's easy to say we love Jesus too, the one who is perfect and holy and good. But the true test comes with the Judases in our lives, the people who hurt us, betray us, who live in direct opposition to what we believe. And loving your enemies doesn't mean accepting their choices or excusing their sins or pretending that everything is fine. Love doesn't mean silence in the face of evil. Love means willing the good of the other, their true, eternal good. It means praying for their conversion, desiring their salvation, and refusing to let hatred take root in your own heart. And in real life, I'm bad at this, so I'm calling myself out here, but like, pray for the coworker who undermines you. It looks like choosing not to trash someone online just because they trashed you first. That one I need to do myself. Instead of getting so angry at someone who, spews hatred towards me and I want to spew it right back to them. No, it's praying for their conversion, answering them in love and charity before anything else. It looks like forgiving family members who will never apologize. And yeah, it looks like mourning the death of someone that you disagreed with because they too were made in the image of God and Christ died for them. That's the kind of radical sacrificial love that proves we belong to Christ. True love, sacrificial love, is willing the good of the other, even when it costs us something, especially when it costs us something. So when the world cheers for death, our Catholic response has to be different. We grieve, we pray, and we love them anyways, because if we don't, we just become another echo in the culture of death. And if we stop there, if we only talk about psychology or culture, we miss the deepest layer of reality, because behind every headline and every act of violence, there's another battle going on. And St. Paul talks about it in Ephesians. This one I took another screenshot of because I wasn't going to remember. Our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in heavenly realms. That's the lens we have to put on as Catholics. Yes, there are political factors. Yes, there are psychological wounds. Yes, there are systemic failures and cultural influences and all of that stuff. But there's also something going on beneath all of that. There's a spiritual war that's raging. And on one side, and I know I've mentioned this before, but it's like we live in these two extremes. On one side, we chalk everything up to spiritual warfare. Oh, that's just the devil. That's just the devil. That's just the devil. And then we do nothing about the real tangible issues in front of us. That's spiritual laziness. That's not discernment. And then on the opposite side, we explain everything away with just natural causes, mental health, gun laws, stress, sleep, whatever. But we never actually acknowledge the reality of evil spirits working against human souls. So that's blindness. That's living as if the supernatural doesn't exist. And the truth is that both are real. There are natural explanations for why sometimes people snap, but there are also spiritual forces that are manipulating and amplifying and pushing human weakness towards destruction. Evil thrives in that tension. And the devil does not care whether we over-spiritualize something or under-spiritualize something. He wins both ways. If you see a demon behind every inconvenience, he's got you distracted. But if you never see a demon at all, well, then he's got you blind. But when we see clearly, when we recognize that Every act of violence is both human and spiritual, both natural and supernatural. That's when we can respond rightly, not with fear, not with numbness, but with the armor of God, which is truth, righteousness, faith, prayer, and perseverance. So when these tragedies happen, don't let the devil twist your heart. Don't let him drive you to despair or to anger or to indifference. Recognize the battlefield. Recognize the battlegrounds that you're standing on and remember that Christ has already won the war. So then the question becomes, if this is the battlefield we're standing on, what can we actually do? How do we respond in a way that's Catholic, real, and effective, not just words tossed into the void? And it's like, I'm so predictable, but my first response is going to be prayer, not the thoughts and prayers that get mocked online, but the sacrificial, intentional prayer, offering a mass for the victims, praying a rosary or a Divine Mercy chaplet for their souls, setting time aside to intercede, not just scrolling past the headlines. And the second response is fasting and reparation. When violence breaks out into the world, our instinct is to often look outward, to point fingers and to debate politics, to vent online. But the saints remind us that healing often begins inward. So when we fast and we make little sacrifices, when we offer reparation for the sins of the world, we join our suffering to Christ's and invite his grace into the places that need it the most. And the third way, my third response, is witness. So showing up differently in our homes and communities, teaching our kids what real love looks like, practicing forgiveness in our marriages and friendships with people who disagree with us, refusing to speak words of hatred when people do disagree with us, being a peacemaker, not just a peace talker. So, those are just some thoughts I had. But last but not least, the last response in my head is always action. And that looks like supporting organizations that care for victims of violence, giving up your time, maybe advocating for policies that uphold the dignity of life, mentoring a teenager who doesn't have support at home, whatever it is. The call is really the same, to be the hands and feet of Christ in a world that desperately needs him. And when Catholics respond with prayer and fasting, witness and action, we're not going to end every tragedy, but we can stop evil from spreading into our own hearts, and we can start planting seeds of healing in the world around us. And after all of that, the grief, the evil, the battle, we have to end where every Catholic should always end, with hope. Because no matter how dark the world gets, Christ has already conquered sin and death. The cross was not defeat, it was victory. And the resurrection proves that violence, hatred, and death, they never get the last word. When we face tragedies like all the ones that we're dealing with, it's tempting to despair. It's tempting to think that evil is winning. But if you're listening to this right now, you have to know Christ has not abandoned us. Even if it feels like it, his love is stronger than hate. His mercy is greater than sin, and his victory is final. Our call as Catholics is to live as witnesses of that hope, to bring light into places of darkness, to speak life where the world only speaks death, to love sacrificially and relentlessly and unconditionally, because that's the only force powerful enough to break the cycle of violence. So hold on to that hope, if anything. Cling on to Christ. And remember that we are not powerless in this world. We have the sacraments and prayer and the communion of saints, and we have a God who is alive, who is with us, and who will never stop fighting for us. And before I end, I just want to make sure that I say this kind of like a disclaimer. I normally don't speak about current events or politics or, things that go on, especially in a podcast long form way. But with all the tragedies going on, it just felt odd to not address those things, because even if you're someone who maybe doesn't live in the United States, maybe you don't know who Charlie Kirk is, maybe you didn't hear about the shooting at the Annunciation Church, maybe you're not aware of the subway murder and the Denver shooting, and I could name one tragedy for every single day of the week. But we all deal with our own tragedies in one way or another, whether you lose a parent, a child, a spouse, you get a diagnosis, you lose a job. It's just, there's so many different levels of suffering that we go through in this life. And so maybe you're not affected necessarily by the headline tragedies that I'm alluding to and talking about, or maybe you just have no idea. There will be some point in your life where you deal with some sort of tragedy, something that turns your life upside down, whether on a public world type of scale or a more private, personal way. And either way, my goal is to always align our sight back to Christ and always highlight that throughout any suffering, whether it's public for a public figure, or whether it's a tragedy that's all over the news, or whether it's just something that's going on with you, all of those types of tragedies, all of those fights that we go through, all of that evil that we're faced with, and maybe not directly evil against you. Maybe it's something outside of your control, a diagnosis, or, a tragic accident, something like that. All of those things, God will not abandon us throughout our struggles. He will help us through it. He won't take away the pain, but He will help you through the pain. And that's what I want everyone who listens to this to keep their eyes focused on. So I'm not somebody who's going to give you some black and white commentary. I'm not a breaking news channel. I'm not a political channel. It goes without saying what my beliefs are. Jesus is my president, my king, I don't idolize anyone in politics. I don't trust anyone in politics or in a position of power. To me, I look to Jesus, I look to the Catholic Church, I look to the Pope. Those are my people that I look up to. And so I don't not that anyone has made me feel a certain type of way, but I have gotten comments on my socials like, well, you need to speak about this and you need to talk about that and you need to bring attention to this. And it's like, no, my mission here is to bring attention to our faith, to Jesus Christ, to the gospel, and to help people become more maybe devout. It's like my favorite word, but more on fire for their faith. I just want to hopefully play a small role in someone's reversion or conversion or whatever it is to our beautiful faith that has the fullness of truth. And I'm not here to talk about politics. I'm not here to talk about current events. I'm not here to give you my opinions. I think we have way too many people sharing their opinions about tragedies, about policies, about politics, about current events, about pop culture. I will dabble in them here and there when I feel like it's beneficial, but I will not monetize or capitalize off of tragedies going on unless I can help someone maybe navigate through them and always point back to Christ. So I just kind of wanted to say that because it's not like every week I'm going to be talking about the latest unfortunate but probably inevitable school shooting or another tragedy or maybe something political going on. That's not what I cover, and that's not what I intend to cover. But I felt this was a good opportunity to try and shift the focus from not the tragedy in and of itself, which again, you can find hundreds of people on YouTube and Spotify who are giving their black and white opinions of what's right and what's wrong and what they believe. And, I just think we have too much of that already. I don't want other people's opinions. I want to lean on my faith. I want to lean on Jesus. I want to discern. I want to pray. And I want to, hopefully, be as obedient as possible. And that's good enough for me type of thing. But yeah, I just wanted to kind of give that disclaimer because I know that I did touch upon some things today, but that's not going to be, the norm. But I did think it was important to talk about certain things in that way to kind of help navigate through tragedies. Because again, whether it's a public tragedy we're all kind of going through and witnessing, or whether it's your own personal tragedy that has, struck you in your life, I want you to be able to have a way to maybe someone in your corner telling you like you are not alone. God has not abandoned you, no matter how lonely and difficult it might be for you right now. So anyways, before we close, I just want to make sure that I mention that I do love hearing from you guys and I try and answer every email I get. So if you have a story or a question or even just a reaction, you can send it in. My email is theaftermasspodcast@gmail.com. So with all of that said, thank you so much for being here and for not shying away from weird or hard conversations. I really appreciate it. But just remember, you're not alone. Christ is victorious and there is always hope. I know, cliche, whatever. My husband will tell me how cliche that is, but there is always hope. So don't lose sight of that. Thank you again for being here. I will see you after Mass.